The Vostrii ambassador waited for me to bow lower than a human spine was meant to bend. I bowed lower. My forehead almost touched the polished black stone of the Geneva Accord chamber floor, and I held the pose for 3 full seconds, just as I had written in the protocol document 2 weeks before. Somewhere above me, the ambassador made a soft clicking sound in his throat. Approval. He thought I was frightened. He thought all of us were frightened. I straightened up slowly, keeping my eyes down, and walked backward to my place at the side of the hall. My name is Henry Clark. I am a commander in the Earth Coalition Intelligence Directorate, and for 15 years I have been lying to the galaxy with my whole body. The signing ceremony went on for another 40 minutes. Our so-called ambassador, a kind-faced older man named Walter Briggs, nodded along to every clause the Vostrii read aloud. New trade terms that gave the conquered first refusal on every mineral we pulled from our own asteroid belt. New travel restrictions that kept human ships inside the orbit of Mars unless the conquered gave written permission. A new cultural exchange program that was, in plain words, a way to move conquered observers into every government building on Earth. Walter signed all of it. He even smiled while he signed, a small, grateful smile that he had practiced in front of a mirror for a month. I watched his hand shake a little as he wrote his name. That part was real. Walter hated this more than any of us. He was the one who had to wear the mask in public. When the ceremony ended, the Vostrii ambassador floated down from his raised platform on the little anti-gravity disk that his species used to avoid touching the floors of lesser worlds. He glided right past the chairs where our government sat and stopped in front of me. "Commander Clark," he said, in that wet, careful standard they taught their diplomats, "your people bow well today." "Thank you, honored voice," I said. "We are learning." He tilted his long, pale head and looked at me for a moment too long. Then he laughed, a dry hissing laugh, and moved on. That night I sat alone in my apartment above the old city, with the lights off and one window open. The broadcast was playing on the screen in front of me. Walter's signature was already being shown across every channel on Earth, along with clips from the welcome parade we had thrown that morning for the conquered delegation. Children waving paper flags, school teachers weeping on camera. A marching band that had been told to miss a few notes on purpose, so the conquered analysts listening in would mark down another point on the column labeled charmingly primitive. My hands were steady around the cup of tea I had been holding for the last hour. The tea was cold now. I had not taken a sip. I thought about the first time the Vostrii conquered had arrived in our system 4 years ago. 17 species in a single federation, all riding inside ships the size of small moons. They had drifted past Neptune and parked themselves in a ring around Earth, and their first message had been a warm, gentle greeting, translated into every human language at once. A pre-contact world of promising potential, they called us. A young species in need of friends. We had smiled. We had wept on camera. We had sent up our most hesitant, nervous ambassadors who spoke slowly and fumbled their words on purpose. Our so-called space navy, a patchwork of old satellites and 3 tired patrol ships, rolled out to meet them, and then, in full view of every camera, the Concord had failed its engines and had to be towed back to Luna by a Vostrii tugboat. The Concord had laughed about that. Rel Taven, the cultural attaché who would later become my main handler, still told the story at dinners. He liked to wave all 4 of his arms while he told it, the long S-cylind fingers curling in the air to show how pitiful our little ships had looked. What the Conquered did not know, what they still did not know on the night of the signing, was that the failed engines had not failed. The ambassadors who fumbled their words were speaking a third dialect of a language the Conquered had not yet catalogued. The patrol ships were not our navy. They were decoys. Our navy was somewhere else entirely and had been for a long time. I opened my private log on the small screen in front of me and began to type. Day 5491. The ambassador bowed correctly today, The treaty was signed without issue. Walter did well, though he needs another week of rest before the next performance. The conquered believes we are now one step closer to being a proper protectorate. Good. Let them believe. I paused. My grandmother, I wrote, used to keep a bird feeder outside her kitchen window. In winter, when the snow was heavy, every small bird in the county would come to her feeder. They would chirp and flutter and fight over the seeds, and a cat from the next farm would sometimes watch them from the fence. The cat never managed to catch a single bird because the feeder was nailed to the top of a very tall pole. My grandmother told me once that the cat was not stupid. The cat was patient. The cat was waiting for one of two things, either for the birds to get lazy or for the pole to fall down. I think about that cat often these days. I think about which animal we are in the story. I used to be sure. I am less sure now because the Vostrii ambassador looks at me in a certain way when he thinks I am not watching. He looks at me the way my grandmother's cat used to look at the feeder. I saved the log and closed the screen. Outside my window, a thin rain was falling over Geneva. Somewhere above the clouds, conquered ships were making slow, lazy circles around the planet, their running lights visible as soft moving stars. The phone on my desk buzzed once, a single short message from a number that did not officially exist. Package arrived, intact, ready for study. I read the message 3 times. Then I deleted it, stood up, and poured the cold tea into the sink. The package was the body of a Druk scavenger, one of the Concord's lesser subject races. We had been trying to get our hands on one for 11 months. The Druk rarely left their own ships, and when they did, they wore thick-plated suits that resisted every scan we could throw at them. But 3 days earlier, a Druk merchant had, very sadly, passed away of natural causes while visiting a station in our outer system. The Concord had been informed. The body had been officially cremated. The ashes had been officially returned to the Druk homeworld with full honors. The real body was now in a sealed container 2 kilometers under the Himalayas, in a facility that did not appear on any map, in a country that had officially never agreed to host it. I walked to the window and looked up at the rain. I thought about the careful smile Walter had worn that afternoon. I thought about the way the Vostrii ambassador had looked at me. I thought about the cat and the feeder and which of us was which. I thought, we have been preparing for something like you since before we knew you existed. We have been preparing since the first time a human being was chased by something larger than himself and decided that this exact feeling would never happen to him again. You just arrived a little late, 100 years too late, and you do not know it yet. The rain came down harder. I closed the window. Tomorrow, Walter would bow again. Tomorrow, the Concord would take another small bite out of us, and we would let them. Tomorrow, I would smile at Reltavin over a glass of his sharp green wine, and I would ask him, as I always did, to tell me the story of our poor little patrol ships and the kind Vostrii tug that had towed them home. He would laugh, he would wave his 4 arms. And I would remember, very carefully, exactly where he sat, and how he moved, and what his laugh sounded like when he was happy. Because one day, not far from now, I would need to know. The message came through at 4 in the morning, local Geneva time, and by 4:15 I was on a military transport flying east without having told my wife where I was going. I did not have a wife. That was part of the cover, but the neighbors thought I did, and so every time I left in a hurry I made sure to leave a note for her on the kitchen counter. The note was for the Concord observer 3 floors up who read my mail. 6 hours later I was in a room under a mountain, looking at a map of Kepler 442b. The colony had gone silent at 2 in the morning. 2,111 colonists. Farmers, engineers, 3 small schools, a hospital that had just opened the year before. The last message from the colony's communication officer, a young woman named Clara Bishop, had been a single line. Ships in orbit. Not ours. Not conquered. Hostile. Then nothing. Admiral Margaret Holt stood at the front of the room with her hands clasped behind her back. She was 61 years old, gray-haired, short, and wore her uniform like it had been grown on her. She had been my commanding officer for 12 years, and I had never once seen her surprised. "The Druk," she said. "We are certain," someone at the long table asked. "We are certain." She touched the map, and the image zoomed into the orbital scan. 3 scavenger ships, unmarked, the same rough design we had pulled apart in our labs over the past year. They came in through the outer belt, avoided our monitoring buoys, and were on top of the colony before the defense grid registered them. "And the defense grid," the same voice asked. "Performed exactly as we ordered it to," the admiral said. The room went very still. I kept my face empty. This was the part I had been dreading for 11 months, ever since the plan had been approved in a closed session so secret that only 9 people on the planet knew about it. The defense grid at Kepler 442b had been designed to look strong to outside scans and to be, in fact, barely functional. We had wanted the Druk to come. We had needed the Druk to come. We had needed to see how they fought when they thought they were unopposed. And now 2,111 human beings were gone, and I was the one who had signed the approval for the decoy grid. Admiral Holt looked at me from across the table. Her eyes held mine for a long moment. Then she moved on. "The Concord has been informed," she said. "Their response arrived 20 minutes ago. Reltaven will read it to Commander Clark in person this evening over dinner as a gesture of warmth. I have seen the text." And a quiet voice asked from the corner. It was Oliver Grant, our lead xenobiology engineer. He was 34, had the permanent sleepless look of a man who spent more time with alien tissue than with his own family, and was the best mind in the building. "The Concord," the admiral said, "expresses its deep condolences. The Concord reminds us that frontier colonies carry known risks. The Concord suggests that Earth might wish to request formal Concord patrol coverage of our outer systems, in exchange for a modest increase in our tribute quota." Oliver made a small sound in the back of his throat. "They did not even pretend," he said. "No," the admiral said, "they did not." She turned back to the map. "Commander Clark, you will accept Reltaven's condolences tonight. You will weep if you can manage it. You will tell him that Earth is grateful for the Concord's wisdom, and that we will consider their generous offer with all due seriousness. Then you will come directly from that dinner to Site Chandra, where Mr. Grant and his team will be waiting for you." "Site Chandra," I said. "The package is ready," she said. That evening, I sat across from Reltaven at a long table in the Concord's floating embassy above Lake Geneva. He wore dark silver robes and had dimmed his 4 hands with soft gray gloves, which among the Escilin was a gesture of formal mourning. It was a gesture meant for lost family members. It was, I understood as I watched him, meant to flatter me. "Little Henry," he said, and his voice was soft and sticky with practiced sorrow, "I grieve for your lost children on that faraway rock. I grieve as if they were my own small ones." "Thank you, honored voice," I said. My voice cracked on the word voice. I had not planned the crack. It came out on its own, and I let it. He slid a small silver box across the table to me. Inside was a bottle of pale yellow liquid. "Wine from my own world," he said. "It was made in the year my eldest daughter was born. Drink it tonight, alone, and think of her, and think of your lost colony, and know that the Concord is with you in your sorrow." I accepted the box with both hands and bowed over it. "Tell me," he said gently, as if he was almost embarrassed to ask, "has your coalition considered the offer of patrol coverage? It is a generous offer." "We are considering it, honored voice," I said. "We are only a young people. We do not always know what is best for us." He smiled, which on a Escilin face meant pulling the corners of the mouth down rather than up. "You are learning," he said. 4 hours later I was in Site Chandra, 2 kilometers under the rock of the northern mountains. in a room that smelled of clean metal and the faint chemical bite of the fluid that kept the package fresh. Oliver Grant was waiting for me in a long white coat, and behind him, on a table built for exactly this purpose, lay the body of the Drook. It was smaller than I had expected. In the reports, the Drook were always described as terrifying. Plated, armored, many-limbed, fast. The body on the table was 3 feet long, thin, and curled slightly on itself. Without its suit, without its weapons, it looked like a dried-out insect. "Natural causes," Oliver said, and gave me a very small smile. "Very natural." "Do not tell me anything I do not need to know, Mr. Grant," I said. "Understood, sir." He walked me around the table. The body had been opened along the chest in a long, careful line. Inside, a team of 4 specialists in full isolation suits were at work, pulling out small, glittering pieces of equipment that had been woven directly into the creature's bones. Some of the pieces were obviously weapons. Others were obviously sensors. One, a small cube of dull black metal at the base of the skull, was something Oliver could not yet identify. "They are hybrids," Oliver said. "The Drook do not wear armor and weapons. They grow armor and weapons. They are partly machine from birth. This is how their entire caste is built." "What does this tell us?" I asked. "It tells us," Oliver said, "that the Drook are terrifying in combat because they are designed to be. But it also tells us something the Conquered probably does not want anyone to know." He pointed to a small hollow in the creature's spine. "This is a control port. Every Drook soldier has one. Someone somewhere can press a button and switch an entire Drook raiding party off. The Drook are not just a subject race of the Conquered. They are a tool. The Vostri can turn them on and off." I stared at the little hollow. "Can we turn them off?" I asked. "Give me 6 months," Oliver said, "maybe 8. I turned away from the table and walked slowly to the far wall, where a glass panel showed the deeper parts of the facility. Row after row of sealed rooms. Row after row of projects that the surface world would never know about. In the lowest row, I could see the soft blue glow of the chamber where we kept the Vostri communication core that we had officially lost in a shuttle accident 2 years before, the one Reltaven still occasionally mentioned with a sad chuckle about human incompetence. Oliver came up beside me. "May I ask you something, sir?" "Go ahead." "Is it worth it, 2,000 people on Kepler?" I kept looking at the glass panel for a long time before I answered. "No," I said finally, "it is not worth it. Nothing will ever be worth it." He nodded slowly. "But we are going to do it anyway," I said, "because the alternative is 20 billion people on Earth, fed into the Conquered's tribute system year after year, century after century, until there is nothing left of us but the shape of what they let us be. We are doing it so that one day we can stop doing it." He said nothing. I walked back to the table and stood over the body of the Drook. I thought about Clara Bishop, the communications officer, whose last message had been 4 short words. I thought about the schoolteachers on Kepler 442b. I thought about the way Reltaven had slid the bottle of wine across the table, slow and gentle, like a man placing flowers on a grave he had already dug. I took out my private log and typed 1 line. "Every bite they take teaches us the shape of their teeth." Then I closed the log and went to help Oliver. By morning, the first rough map of a Drook control port was drawn on the wall of Site Chundra in blue ink, and my hands did not shake, because I had taught them long ago that they were not allowed to. 11 months after Kepler, a shuttle that did not exist took me to a shipyard that did not exist, and for the first time in my career, I saw what my own species had been building in the dark. The shuttle was small, black, and unmarked. It had no windows. It had no pilot because no pilot could be trusted with the route. It flew itself, on a path that changed every time, through a long string of relay points scattered across the outer system. I sat in the single seat for 11 hours with nothing to do but think, and when the door finally opened, I stepped out into a hangar that made me forget how to breathe for a moment. The shipyard was inside a hollowed-out dwarf planet. The Concord's charts listed the place as a lifeless lump of rock orbiting a cold gray star, far beyond the outer edge of our official territory. The Concorde had even scanned it twice in the first year of contact. Both scans had come back empty, which was, of course, the point. We had been feeding the Concorde's own sensors false data through a relay we had buried inside one of their survey buoys. Every time a Concorde ship looked at this rock, it saw what we wanted it to see. Inside the rock, there were 1,100 ships. I walked along the upper walkway with Admiral Holt beside me. From that height, the ships looked like long silver fish in a dark blue sea. Some were the size of our old destroyers. Others were bigger than any vessel the Concorde had ever shown us. The largest of them, a flagship we had named the Vachaspati after a human philosopher who had written about patience, was almost 4 kilometers long, and it was not even the biggest thing in the room. The biggest thing in the room was the construction frame, a lattice of dark metal beams that stretched for almost 10 kilometers along the inner wall, and which was currently building 3 more ships at once. 1,100, I said quietly. 1,184, the Admiral said. As of this morning, 3 more will come out of the frame this week. And crews. Fully trained. Every single ship. We have been rotating personnel through the long sleep facility on series for 9 years. Every officer you see has spent at least 4 years in simulated combat against every Concorde doctrine we have been able to reconstruct. I leaned on the railing and looked down. Are they copies, I asked, of Concorde tech? No, she said this with a small private smile. They are better. She walked me slowly down a set of stairs that took us onto the hangar floor, where the nearest ship, a medium-class destroyer called the Harper, was undergoing final calibration. The name Harper meant nothing to me. I asked. The Admiral told me that Harper had been one of our engineers, a man who had worked on this exact shipyard for 7 years before a tunnel collapse had taken him the previous winter. His name was on the ship because his daughter had asked for it, and the Admiral had said yes. We lost him, I asked. We lost him. Concorde. No rock. She let me stand with that for a moment before she moved on. Inside the Harper, she walked me through the bridge. It was tighter than a Concorde bridge, more crowded, and every single console had a manual override beside the main screen. I touched one of the override levers. It was heavy, stiff, and covered in a thick rubber grip. Why the manual overrides? I asked. Because the Concorde fights with beautiful machines, the Admiral said. We fight with ugly ones. Their ships assume that every system will work perfectly, because for 200 Concorde cycles, every Concorde system has worked perfectly. Our ships assume that half of everything will be on fire and the rest will be flooding. That is the world our engineers grew up in, Henry. Every one of them has a grandmother who fixed a tractor with wire and prayer. That is the advantage. I had never heard her make a speech before. I did not interrupt her. The Concorde has forgotten how to fight a war where things go wrong, she said. They have had peace for so long that their officers have never needed to improvise. We, on the other hand, have done nothing for the last 200 years but learn how to survive when things go wrong. Even our own history taught us that, long before the Concorde arrived. She turned away from the console. Come, she said, there is one more thing you need to see. The one more thing was a small room 3 levels down, with no name on the door. Inside the room was a single long table, and on the table were 17 folders. Each folder had a name on it. 17 names. 17 species of the Vostrii Concorde. The sleepers, the Admiral said. I sat down slowly at the table and pulled the first folder toward me. It was marked with the S-Cylind glyph for the Concorde's ruling caste. Inside were photographs, documents, dossiers. 41 human beings, surgically altered, linguistically perfect, placed inside S-Cylind society over the course of the last decade. Cooks, tutors, translators, personal assistants. One of them, a woman whose photograph I recognized at once, was currently working as the private administrator of a certain cultural attaché based above Lake Geneva. Lucy Bennett, I said. 9 years in position, the Admiral said. She has passed every medical scan he has ever run on her, because her papers say she is a Scillan cousin from the outer provinces, and her body has been adjusted to match. Reltaven trusts her with his correspondence. He trusts her with his schedule. He trusts her with his medicine cabinet. She has been within arm's reach of him for every major decision he has made regarding Earth for nearly a decade. I looked up from the folder. Every species, I asked. Every species, the Admiral said, some more, some less. The Vostrii themselves were the hardest because their high caste does not take outsiders into the home. We have 6 Vostrii sleepers. They took 11 years to place. They are worth every year. I turned the pages of the folder slowly. The faces of the sleepers looked back at me. They were not soldiers. They were not heroes. They were, for the most part, quiet, ordinary-looking people who had volunteered for this work because they understood the shape of the thing coming toward us and had decided that they would rather spend their lives inside it than outside it. I closed the folder. How many people on Earth know about this room? I asked. Now she said 10. She sat down across from me and folded her hands. Henry, she said, I am going to tell you something that is not in any folder. It is not written anywhere on this station. It is not said aloud anywhere except now, in this room. I am telling you because in a year, maybe 2, I am going to need you to do something, and I need you to have thought about it for long enough to be ready. Tell me. The Conquered is going to move on us soon. They are tired of waiting for Earth to become properly obedient. They will make an offer we cannot publicly refuse. They will frame it as protection. They will send a fleet. I know. When they do, she said, you will be the voice that refuses them. Me? You? Why me? Because Reltaven trusts you. Because the Vostrii ambassador has listed you in his reports as a cooperative and broken-spirited liaison, and that report has gone up to the Conquered's inner council. When the Conquered decides to move, they will expect you to bow again. They will send their ultimatum through you so that you can carry it back to Earth's government and beg them to sign. And instead, you will look at the Conquered's camera and you will speak, in their own language, without a script. She watched me. I have not decided what I will say, I said quietly. I know, she said, say the true thing, that is usually enough. Later, back on the walkway above the ships, I stood alone and watched the lights of the shipyard move in long, slow patterns along the hulls of the silver fish. Somewhere among them was the Harper, and inside it, a set of rubber-gripped manual override levers built by people whose grandmothers had fixed tractors with wire and prayer. Somewhere among them was the Vachaspati, and inside it was a chair that would one day be mine. I thought about Reltaven and his 4 gray gloves and the bottle of yellow wine I had never opened. I thought about Lucy Bennett, standing quietly at his elbow for 9 years, smiling her Scillan smile, answering his phones. I thought they mistook our patience for weakness. They mistook our silence for fear. They did not understand that a species that has spent 100,000 years hiding from its own predators has learned, down to its bones, how to wait. The lights of the shipyard moved on the hulls. I turned and went back to the shuttle, and the shuttle carried me home through a different route than the one that had brought me, because no path was ever allowed to be used twice. The ultimatum arrived on a Tuesday, and I was eating toast when the call came. My private line had not rung in 6 months. When it did, I knew before I picked it up that the day I had been told about in the small, unnamed room had finally come. I set the toast down on the plate. I wiped my hands on the kitchen cloth. I answered the phone on the 3rd ring, because answering on the 2nd ring would have looked too alert. Commander Clark. It was the Admiral's voice, flat and clean. A Conquered delegation is entering our orbit in 74 minutes. 3 warships, 1 envoy vessel. Reltaven is aboard. He has requested you as the receiving officer. He has also requested that the reception take place live, on every Earth broadcast channel at once, so that our population may, in his words, share the joy of the coming announcement. I understand. I said. Car is at your door, she said, and hung up. The car was waiting. I took my coat from the hook by the door, and I walked out of my apartment for what I already suspected might be the last time for a while. In the back seat of the car was Walter Briggs, our old false ambassador, the man who had practiced his grateful smile in the mirror for a month 4 years ago. He was 91 now, thinner, slower, but his eyes were still sharp, and he was wearing the same formal blue coat he had worn at the signing. They asked for me too, he said. One last performance, they said. And I asked. I told them yes, he said, but I told the Admiral I was finished with performances. I looked at him. He smiled a small, real smile, and I felt a sudden warmth in my chest that I had not allowed myself to feel in 4 years. Good, I said. The conquered delegation arrived above Geneva in a show of careful force. 3 Vostri warships, slender, beautiful, polished to a mirror finish, took positions over the lake. The envoy vessel descended slowly and opened its ramp. Reltavin came down the ramp in his most formal robes, silver and deep blue, with all 4 of his hands uncovered, which meant he was coming in triumph. Behind him came 8 Vostri officers in full dress uniform. Every channel on Earth was live. I stood at the base of the ramp with Walter beside me. Behind us, in rows, stood what looked like our senior government. Most of them were not our senior government. Most of them were trained actors and retired officials, because the real government was, as of that morning, elsewhere. The conquered did not know the difference, because the conquered had long since stopped studying our faces carefully. Reltavin reached us and spread his 4 arms in a wide gesture of blessing. Little Henry, he said warmly, in front of every camera, today is a great day. Today your young people take their next step into the family of stars. He turned to face the main camera, and he began to read. I will not repeat the words of the ultimatum here, because they were long and they were cruel, and they were designed to sound like kindness. The short of it was this. Earth was to be formally absorbed into the conquered as a full protectorate. Our military, such as it was officially known to be, was to be disbanded. Our orbital infrastructure was to be handed over to Vostri administration. Our young people were to be enrolled, starting at age 12, in a conquered cultural education program that would take them off Earth for a minimum of 10 years at a time. Our tribute quota would be tripled, and because the conquered was generous, Earth would be given 1 day to sign. Reltavin finished reading. He lowered the scroll. He smiled his excellent smile. Commander Clark, he said, on behalf of your world, please accept. Every camera turned to me. I had not written a speech. The Admiral had told me not to write one. I stepped forward and I spoke in High Vostri cleanly, without an accent, because for 15 years I had been hiding the fact that I spoke High Vostri better than most Vostri did. Honored voice, I said, I decline. Reltavin's 4 hands went very still. In the name of the Earth Coalition, I said, and by the authority of every human being on this planet and off it, I decline the offer of protectorate status. I decline the disbanding of our forces. I decline the surrender of our children. I further note, for the record of the Concord's Inner Council, that the terms presented today are in direct violation of 17 separate clauses of the initial contact treaty signed 4 years ago, including but not limited to clauses 3, 7, 11, 14, and 22. I have prepared a full list. It will be transmitted to the Concord's Council within the hour. The cameras were still rolling. Reltavin opened his mouth. Little Henry, he said, and his voice was softer than it had ever been. Who wrote this speech for you? I did, honored voice, I said. When? I have been writing it for 15 years. He stared at me, and for the first time since the day I had met him, I saw something in his face that he had never shown me before. It was not fear. He was not yet afraid. It was the smaller, colder thing that comes before fear, which is the realization that one has been wrong about something for a very long time. "Goodbye, Reltaven," I said quietly. He did not understand the second part, because he did not know that at that exact moment, 6 hours earlier on her own internal clock, Lucy Bennett was stepping out of his private quarters above Lake Geneva, where she had just completed her final task as his assistant. What she had done was not a harm. It was a quiet thing involving his communication implant and a small device she had worn in her hair for 9 years. From that moment on, Reltaven could speak to no one in the conquered command structure without us hearing every word. Across 300 conquered worlds, at the same moment, other quiet things were happening. A Scillan sector governor discovered that every one of her household staff had, overnight, stopped taking her orders and started answering only to a voice she did not recognize. A Vostrii fleet admiral found that his flagship's command codes had been quietly rewritten by his own personal steward, a kindly older gentleman who had served him for 11 years, and who, that morning, did not come to work. A Druk raiding captain reached for his control console and found it locked from the inside, because Oliver Grant's team had, over the past 14 months, finished mapping the Druk control port and had, as it turned out, found a way to speak to it from a distance. Every Druk vessel in a 4-sector radius that morning simply stopped responding to its own commanders, because the Druk soldiers inside them were now, politely but firmly, listening to someone else. None of this made the news that morning. The Conquered did not know how to report something it did not yet understand. But the 3 warships above Lake Geneva noticed immediately. The lead Vostrii destroyer began to turn its long white guns toward our planet. I watched it on the screens set up at the reception. The movement was slow, confident, the movement of a creature that had never lost a match and did not expect to start losing now. And then, from below the ecliptic, from the asteroid belt, from the dark side of the moon, from inside a supply tender that the Vostrii had brought with them without checking, 1,187 silver ships came up into the light. The conquered fleet above Geneva had exactly 40 minutes to understand what was happening. I will not describe the engagement at length. It was not a long contest, and it was not a proud one. It was the opening of a long door that had been built quietly for many years and then pushed open all at once. Our ships were better. Our crews were better. Our doctrine was better. Most of all, our surprise was total, because the Conquered had spent 4 years believing its own reports about us, and its reports had all been written by people we had been feeding the wrong data to. At minute 37, the lead Vostrii destroyer signaled its surrender. At minute 39, the second destroyer signaled its surrender. At minute 40, the third did the same. The envoy vessel which carried Reltaven did not surrender, because there was no one on it with the authority to do so. Its captain had been a devout follower of the Conquered's ruling caste, and had, as a matter of faith, refused to accept that a lower species could defeat a higher one. The envoy vessel was surrounded, disabled, and boarded, and Reltaven was escorted, still in his formal robes, onto one of our ships. He said nothing during the transfer. He would not look at me. The Vostrii flagship, which had been leading the assault formation from a long distance out, was the last vessel still active in the engagement zone. I stood on the bridge of the Vachaspati and watched on the forward screen as our boarding craft crossed the last of the distance between us and her. The flagship's high admiral was a woman named Vothra Enves. She was old, even by Vostrii standards, and she had commanded her ship for 60 of our years. She had won 12 fleet engagements in the Conquered's minor border conflicts. She had never once been boarded. She had never once lost a ship. Our boarding team reached her command deck after 11 minutes of quiet, efficient work through the corridors of her flagship. I was not on the boarding team. I was watching from the Vachaspati on a secure line, and I was listening through the earpiece of our lead boarder, a young officer named Thea Holloway. "High Admiral," I heard Thea say. "You will not take my ship," the High Admiral said. Her standard was slow and perfect. You were grateful. There was a pause. I leaned forward in my chair on the Vachaspati and pressed the reply button. "High Admiral," I said in my own voice through Thea's earpiece. "This is Commander Henry Clark, Earth Coalition. We were not grateful." "Then what were you?" she asked, and her voice was almost a whisper. "We were studying," I said. There was a very long silence. Then the High Admiral of the Vostrii flagship, who had never once lost a ship, quietly placed her command baton on the console in front of her, turned it 90 degrees to the left, which was the Vostrii gesture of full and formal surrender, and stepped back from the controls. "I would like to speak to my council," she said. "You will," I said, "in time." On the bridge of the Vachaspati, no one cheered. That was not the kind of culture Admiral Holt had built. People simply went back to their stations and began the long work of processing surrenders, of organizing prisoner transfers, of checking our own ships for damage. I walked to the viewport and looked out at the space around Earth. Conquered ships, ours now, drifted in slow patterns between our silver fish. The sky above our planet had changed, and the galaxy, I knew, was already beginning to notice. Walter Briggs came up beside me. He had ridden out the engagement in a reinforced chamber 2 decks below, and someone had given him a cup of tea. He was 91, and the cup was shaking a little in his hand, but his eyes were clear. "Henry," he said. "Walter." "I am very tired," he said. "I know. I would like to go home now. I do not think I would like to wear the blue coat again." "You will not have to," I said. He nodded, and he stood there with me for a long time, and we watched the silver fish move. Somewhere in the wider galaxy, in cities we had never seen, a long silence was beginning to spread. Every subject race of the conquered, every rival, every neutral. They were all watching the small blue planet that had just opened the door, and they were all, in their own ways, beginning to ask the same question. What will the humans do now? What we did, in the first days after the door opened, was nothing. That was the hardest part. The fleet stayed where it was. The boarding teams completed their work and brought the prisoners to a neutral station we had prepared years in advance, where they were treated correctly, fed, housed, and given access to their own religious and medical specialists. The Concorde's 3 warships above Lake Geneva were quietly escorted out of our atmosphere and parked in a holding orbit around the moon. The envoy vessel was sealed. Reltaven was placed in a comfortable set of rooms on our flagship, with his own books, his own foods, and a medical team of his own species that we had, very patiently, arranged to have on call for exactly this day. For 7 full Earth days, the Earth Coalition said nothing to the galaxy. This was not an accident. This was Admiral Holt's plan, and it had been her plan for a long time. She had argued for it in closed sessions for years. "Say nothing," she had said. "Let them guess. Let their fear do for them what our words cannot." A species that has just seen a mouse outrun a cat wants to be told immediately that the mouse is still a mouse. Do not tell them. Let them wonder. So for 7 days, every conquered broadcast channel tried to reach Earth and failed. Every diplomatic query went unanswered. Every demand from the Concorde's inner council for Reltaven's return was ignored. Across 300 worlds, the absence of our voice began to do what our voice alone could never have done. It began to make the conquered feel small. On the 8th day, I walked into the new Coalition Assembly Hall in Geneva, and I took my seat at the front of the room for the first time. The hall was full. Every one of Earth's major nations had sent its senior representatives. Behind them, in the observer ring, sat the senior officers of every branch of our military. In the front row, seated as private citizens rather than in any formal capacity, were Admiral Holt, Walter Briggs, Oliver Grant, and Lucy Bennett, who had been brought home from her post above the lake 3 days earlier and who was, that morning, wearing a simple gray dress instead of the robes of a Essilin assistant. She caught my eye as I walked in, and she gave me a small nod. The question before us was simple. What now? The Hawks went first. They were not soldiers, as one might expect. Most of them were economists and historians, people who had spent their careers studying the patterns of rising powers. They argued for empire. They argued that the conquered had shown us, over 4 years, exactly how much cruelty a ruling power was willing to use when it thought itself safe. They argued that mercy was a gift that a young species could not afford to give, not at the moment of its rising. Take the conquered's worlds, they said. Take their fleets. Take their tribute systems and turn them around, and for the next century let humanity be the one that collects. I listened to all of it. There was a hard truth inside their words. I did not pretend there was not. Then the doves spoke. They argued for retreat. They argued that we had proven our point, that the galaxy now knew what we were, and that the correct response was to withdraw behind a ring of defensive stations, close our borders, and let the conquered collapse on its own weight as the news of what had happened above Lake Geneva spread through its subject worlds. They argued that we had not spent 15 years pretending to be harmless only to become, in the end, the very thing we had feared. Let the galaxy learn to live without a master, they said. Let us not become the next one. I listened to all of that too. At the end of the second day of debate, Admiral Holt turned to me in the front row and said, quietly, "Henry, you have not yet spoken." "No," I said. "It is time." I stood up. The hall went still. I walked to the central floor, and I did not carry a speech with me, because I had been writing this speech in my head for almost as long as the other one. "Honored members," I began, "I have spent 15 years of my life bowing to a species that believed I was its pet. I will not pretend that there is no part of me that would enjoy seeing Reltaven kneel on the floor of this hall and be made to ask permission to breathe. There is such a part of me. I am not proud of it. I am only honest about it." There was a low murmur through the hall. But I have also spent 15 years watching what that kind of pleasure does to a species. I have watched it shape the conquered. I have watched it rot their officers from the inside. I have watched it turn their governors into small gods and their subject worlds into cattle. I will not have that shape placed on us. Not after what we have already paid. I looked across the hall. "There is a third path," I said. "Neither empire nor retreat. I call it the compact." I explained it to them slowly and in plain words over the next hour. Not rule, not isolation, an open architecture. Any species willing to meet certain standards of conduct, standards written not by Earth alone but by a council of equal voices, could join the compact. The compact would not own worlds. The compact would not demand tribute. What the compact would do, and all it would do, was this. It would stand between a strong species and a weak one. It would stand between an old power and a young one. It would serve, in the Admiral's phrase, not as the head of the galaxy but as its spine. And Earth, I said, would not rule the compact. Earth would be one voice among many, but Earth would carry a particular duty. Earth would carry the memory of what it felt like to bow when it did not want to. Earth would carry the memory of Kepler 442b. Earth would carry the memory of Walter Briggs practicing his smile in the mirror. Earth would sit at the compact's table with those memories, so that no species that joined the compact would ever have to live through what we had lived through. When I finished, the hall was quiet for a very long time. Then Walter Briggs, 91 years old, sitting in the front row in his ordinary brown coat because he had told me he would never again wear the blue one, stood up slowly, leaning on his cane. He did not speak. He simply turned and he began to clap slowly with his thin, papery hands. Lucy Bennett stood up and joined him. Admiral Holt did not stand, but she nodded once deeply and closed her eyes. Oliver Grant wept quietly into his sleeve. The vote was held 3 days later. The compact was approved by a majority that I will not bother to quote here, because the exact number is less important than the fact that the decision was made not by the military and not by the intelligence services, but by a free assembly of ordinary human representatives who had, for the first time, been told the full truth of what their species had been doing in the dark. They forgave us, most of them. Then the work began. The conquered subject races came to us one by one over the following year. Some arrived with gifts, some arrived with trembling, some arrived with weapons testing. The Druk came early. Their High Council, freed for the first time in 2 generations from the Vostri control ports, sent a single old scavenger in a small unarmed ship, and the scavenger carried a simple offering in a small wooden box, which was the armor of his firstborn daughter. He gave it to me in person, without ceremony, and he said, in the rough trade language of the Outer Belt, only this: "We have not worn armor as a gift before. Take it. Tell us what we must do." I told him that the Druk would keep their worlds, that no tribute would be taken from them, and that the only thing the Compact asked of them was that they come to the Compact's council and learn how to speak at a table instead of from behind a wall. He wept. He had never been spoken to by a larger species without a weapon in the room. The Scillen came next. Their arrival was more complicated because many of their leaders had been complicit in the Conquered's worst excesses. We did not pretend otherwise. We sat them down and we walked through a careful, honest account of what they had done. We asked for a small number of formal apologies. We asked for reparations to the worlds that had suffered most. We did not ask for their leaders to be punished, because we were not in the business of building a new system on the back of the old one's habits. Some of the Scillen objected, some cooperated. The ones who cooperated became, in time, the most loyal members of the Compact. The ones who objected were not forced. They were allowed to withdraw. One of their oldest worlds, a dry red planet on the edge of a cold star, declared itself neutral. The Compact recognized its neutrality at once. The red planet has kept its word for 9 years now, and it trades peacefully with its neighbors, and its leaders come to the Compact Council every spring as observers. That was all we ever asked. The Vostri were the hardest. Their high caste had, for 200 cycles, believed itself the natural ruler of the local stars. When the Compact offered them a seat at the table as equals, many of them refused. Some of them wanted to fight on. A small fleet of Vostri loyalists, commanded by an officer who had never been on the bridge above Lake Geneva and who believed the whole story of our victory to be a lie, gathered in a distant system and announced the formation of a new Vostri empire. Admiral Holt handled the matter personally. I will not describe what she did, because it was not the kind of action any of us wished to repeat, and because she has asked, in her private papers, that the record remain quiet on the exact methods. I will say only this. The new Vostri Empire lasted 91 days. At the end of the 91st day, the officer commanding it sent a formal message to the Compact Council asking for terms. The Admiral offered him the same terms that had been offered to every other member of the Vostri High Caste. He accepted. He is, today, a teacher at a small school on his own homeworld, where he tells his students that he was once a very foolish man, and that they should learn from his example how to recognize the end of an age. 8 months after the Compact was formed, I went to visit Reltaven. He had been moved by that point from our flagship to a hospital on a quiet Scillen moon. Lucy Bennett's final gift to him, the quiet thing she had done to his communication implant, had done more damage to his nervous system than any of us had intended. The Scillen doctors had stabilized him, but he was a changed creature. He no longer used all 4 of his hands. 2 of them had gone still. He sat in a wide chair by a round window, looking out at the moon's pale fields. I was shown into his rooms by a young Scillen nurse who bowed to me, correctly, at the door. Reltaven turned his long head when he heard me come in. "Little Henry," he said. His voice was the same, only his voice. "Honored voice," I said. "I am not honored anymore," he said. I sat down across from him. For a long time, neither of us spoke. "I have a question," he said at last. "I have carried it for a year. Will you answer it?" "Yes." "Why the long pretense? Why 15 years? Why not simply meet us as equals from the start, on the day our ships entered your system?" I had known the question would come. I had known for a long time what I would say when it did. I folded my hands in my lap and I spoke slowly so that he would not need to strain to hear me. Because you would not have believed us, I said. Your species has never known a predator. Not truly. Your high caste has ruled the local stars for 200 of your cycles. Before that, you were ruled by another of your own kind, in a slightly smaller empire, for 1,000 years before that. Your people have never, within any memory that can be written down, been hunted. You have no stories of hiding from larger things. You have no language for what it feels like to be the small animal in the tall grass. He watched me. My species, I said, has been nothing else. For 100,000 years, we were the small animal in the tall grass. Everything around us was bigger than us, faster than us, hungrier than us. We survived only by being clever, only by being patient, only by working together, only by waiting. Then very slowly, we became the larger animal ourselves. And when we did, we discovered something that no species that has never been hunted can ever understand. We discovered that the only creature more dangerous than a predator is a predator that remembers being prey. I let those words sit in the quiet room. If we had met you as equals on the day your ships arrived, I said, you would have laughed. You would have made us a protectorate in a week. Your high caste would have felt no fear because you had no way of knowing what we were. So we showed you the other face first. The face you expected. The grateful face. The bowing face. We showed it to you until you were certain of us. Until you put all your reports of us up to your inner council and all your inner council believed them. We had to let you see the teeth only once, Reltaven, so that we would never have to show them again. He closed his eyes for a long moment. I called you Little Henry, he said. For 15 years I called you Little Henry. I know. I did not mean it cruelly. I know. I meant it the way one speaks to a child. I know. Forgive me, he said. I thought about it for a long time, looking out the window at the moon's pale fields. Yes, I said, I forgive you. But more importantly, you are forgiven by the compact, which is a larger forgiveness than mine, and you will be allowed to teach again, when your health permits, at a school of your own choosing. And if you decide to teach, Reltaven, teach the thing you just learned. Teach the small ones of your people what you did not know about mine. It will be the most useful thing any Essilin elder has taught in 200 cycles. He did not speak again for a long time. When I rose to leave, I thought he had fallen asleep, but as I reached the door of his room, he called my name softly. Henry. I turned. Your grandmother's cat, he said. I had told him the story once many years ago at a dinner I had pretended to find too sharp. He had remembered it. He had remembered everything. Which animal were you in the end, the cat or the bird? I stood at the door with my hand on the frame. Neither, I said. We were the pole, Reltaven, the one the feeder was nailed to. We were the thing that held the feeder up while the birds lived and the cat watched and the snow fell. That is what we want to be now, for the compact, for everyone. He nodded very slowly. Then he turned his face back to the window. I walked out through the soft Essilin evening. When my shuttle lifted off, I looked down at the quiet hospital moon, and I thought about what I would write in my log that night. I did not write much, I only wrote this. They thought Earth was weak, we let them. And when the galaxy finally learned the shape of us, it was not a shape of conquest. It was a shape of a species that had, at last, decided what it wanted to be, and had the strength to choose. I closed the log. Outside the shuttle window, the new stars of the compact moved in slow, steady patterns across the sky. Some of them were ours. Most of them were not. All of them, for the first time in this part of the galaxy, were moving together. A small girl in Geneva 2 weeks later would ask me at a public event what the bright lights above the city were. I would crouch down so that I was level with her face. I would tell her, after a long moment, that they were ships. She would ask if they were ours. I would think about it. Then I would tell her, truthfully, that they were with us, which is, I still believe, the better answer.